many speakers that an earlier speaker has covered his topic. So, but I hope that I have enough of a different angle to Heather's talk, so it's not totally without worth. Right. Yeah. I start from a non-mathematical movie. The Wizard of Oz. Everybody knows the story. They go to meet the wizard, and the wizard is supposed to give them things. The scarecrow wants a brain. Of course, he doesn't get a brain, he gets a diploma that convinces him that he had a brain all along. It's a nice lesson. But once the scarecrow gets the brain, he shows his intelligence by reciting the Pythagorean Theorem. This is verbatim how it goes. The sum of the square roots of any two sides of an isosceles triangle is equal to the square root of the remaining side. Now there are all kinds of interpretations of this in the internet. Some people say, okay, this is a very sophisticated point they were making with the erroneous mathematics. I don't think so. It's in the script, and in the script there's also a narrative. He recites the Pythagorean Theorem, not a mistaken version of the theorem. So, and the actor didn't watch his line either. So simply the filmmakers, or the crucial ones, they didn't know how the Pythagorean Theorem goes. That's not so interesting. Whenever there's a topic in Hollywood that is based on facts, you are absolutely sure that there's going to be many factual mistakes. But I asked that this is symptomatic of a wider phenomenon. And I propose 3 ways that it might be so. First is that mathematics is clearly something that is highly valued as an intellectual pursuit. It's not a coincidence that the scarecrow recites the theorem of mathematics, or at least he tries to. Second is that it's wrong in so many ways. Of course, the theorem concerns right triangles, not isosceles. It concerns the squares of the sides, not square roots. And even those, it's not the case that sum of any two sides equals the first. It's pretty amazing that in just a few seconds there can be 3 such important errors. But even that's not so interesting if it's not representative of a general attitude. So we value mathematical knowledge in our culture, but so little effort is made to present it correctly. Just to give some perspective, in modern money, the budget of Wizard of Oz was $45 million. It was a huge film, by far the most expensive film made during that time. And nobody bothered to check an encyclopedia for half a minute or whatever it takes. And also a third one. The scarecrow, he just recites the theorem from rote memory. He's not doing anything mathematical. It might as well be a let's say a geographical fact or something like that. There's nothing mathematical in it. Granted, it's not hard to show mathematics being practiced just in a few seconds, but that just tells us that mathematics was a bad fit with the scene to begin with. So is this also an example of a general, wider phenomenon? Are portrayals of mathematics and what mathematicians do misleading? Well, I will talk about those 3 stereotypes, but there's also a 4th and 5th one, which appear to be pretty common. This is a personal anecdote. I had a conversation with a philosophy professor, and I suggested that studies in mathematics might be beneficial for philosophy students who develop logical thinking, so on and so on. And his direct reply was, what about Ted Kaczynski? And everybody knows Ted Kaczynski is the unit bomber. He made letter bombs and killed 3 people, wounding dozens of others. And he was a mathematician, of course. He had a PhD in mathematics. He worked in Berkeley before he became a recluse and started bombing people. So why did the professor mention Ted Kaczynski? It's just one person, so he had to be talking about a stereotype there. And I will consider that there are actually 2 stereotypes involved. First is that mathematicians are asocial, unable to enjoy normal life, because that's essentially what happened to Ted Kaczynski. He became a recluse. And second is the connection between mathematics and insanity. And as the professor implied, this connection appears to be, in popular culture, a causal one. It's mathematics that causes mental illness. Now yesterday somebody suggested also this angle that mathematicians are evil. Well, with Ted Kaczynski, that's a good point, but I didn't find it elsewhere, so that's not included. So I have 5 stereotypes that I will be testing with some films and TV shows. First, mathematics is highly valued. Second is that little attention is given to mathematical content. Third is that mathematical practice is portrayed in an unrealistic way. Fourth, mathematicians are asocial. And fifth, mathematicians have a tendency to be insane. A few words about focus and methodology. I am not concerned with school mathematics here. That's the most popular subject, of course, in popular culture. And there are many stereotypes involved. Mathematically gifted students is almost always a socially awkward, highly intelligent boy. And Heather did a nice job presenting that Mean Girls has a different kind of character, and it's a good topic to study, and perhaps even more important than that. But I will be focusing here on professional mathematicians, how their work and how they are presented in popular culture. And what I mean by popular culture here is movies and TV shows. I also had a chapter on books, but I just don't have the time to go through those. And there need to be important mathematician characters or important mathematical content, not just some fringe character over in a minute or two or something like that. And documentaries, well, they are hardly popular enough to be considered popular culture. I didn't include them, and I limited this to English-speaking world. And it's a good question whether this would be different if we consider Asia or Russia, for example. But let's start with movies. It's hardly surprising that there aren't that many movies about mathematicians, because mathematical ideas are very hard to portray in cinema. But there was a change, and I timed that to Andrew Walsh's proof of Fermat's last theorem. After that, it sort of got the public imagination. After that, there have been many books, many TV documentaries, and fictional movies with mathematicians as main characters, or as the main topic. Let's start on Good Will Hunting. Huge success, and the screenplay in particular, it got the Academy Award, and it was very highly acclaimed. The plot is simple. Everybody knows the story. Self-educated young genius, a math professor wants him to be a mathematician, a psychologist wants him to find happiness, which means getting a girl, of course. Well, what happens in the end of the movie, there is a moral to the story, but it's pretty hard to know what it is because the character is so incredibly complex. He's an expert not in mathematics only, but in just about every academic subject. He's an abused orphan, he wants to go fighting, he works at the construction site with his blue-collar friends, and in the end he chooses the girl and abandons all this. So he's abandoning so many things, it's really hard to know what the moral of the story is, except for one thing. It is made very clear that when he's choosing happiness, he's rejecting happiness. Now, I'll be working in this quasi-systematic manner, so I'll be testing the hypothesis on each film. How about the stereotype that mathematics is highly valued? Well, that's clearly the case because the whole idea was to make Will as intellectually proficient as possible, so they made him a math genius. Mathematical content, it's generally correct, but it's hardly realistic. There's a central scene. Will is working as a janitor at MIT, and the professor leaves 2 math problems on the blackboard. And none of the students can solve the problems, but Will, of course, does. First one is basically linear algebra, but the second one, which is really crucial for the film, it is said that it has taken Fields' medal winning professor and his colleagues years to solve. But the problem is just very simple graph theoretic puzzle. It's not really even mathematics in the way that it's portrayed in the film. So it's like that we have homeomorphically irreducible trees, and the question is how many trees there are with 10 knots. And this is exactly how it's portrayed in the film. Will Hunting draws 6 or 7 of the graphs, which is not even all of them, And the professor sees them and he's convinced that he's a mathematical genius. There's no mathematical proof, nothing at all like that. And if you want to try, I'm no mathematical genius, far from it, but it took me like 5 minutes to solve the problem. Again, it's a Hollywood movie, so let's not expect too much out of the mathematical content. But it's shown for a few seconds. Nobody has a chance to understand what's going on with the problem. Why couldn't it be a real mathematical problem instead of this very simple puzzle? Maybe it doesn't matter, but I think it's the same as a movie about golf. This is an example. They have this young whiz-kid golfer, and he or she completes a meter-long putt. And not even that, the professor or the golf coach just hears that he has completed the meter-long putt, and that is enough. This must be a great golfer. How about mathematical practice? Well, I don't think it fares too badly. It's very unlikely that there could be a person like this, but there is the case of Ramanujan, for example, so there might be a self-taught mathematician in that level. It's somehow plausible. There's very little effort to illuminate the mathematical thought process, aside from him, of course, writing on a mirror. That has to happen in every movie, like Heather pointed out. But he actually does solve mathematical problems. It's not things like reciting things from rote memory or the decimals or of the pi or something like that. It's somehow plausible as mathematics. But one thing that is curious is that this is a guy who has obviously studied a lot of mathematics by himself, but he appears to get no satisfaction at all from the work. It fits the film, but it doesn't fit the general idea I have of mathematicians who are very passionate about their work. The asocial angle, this is a central theme in Good Will Hunting because this is the conflict that's going on. The psychologist reminds Will and the professor that love is important. Will should pursue happiness and love. And he chooses that over mathematics in the end. But that's such a strange dichotomy to have. What does that mean, that a mathematician cannot have the girl and mathematics? I think it's a derogatory one, because it portrays mathematicians as cold people. They can't combine their work, their passion in work, with human relationships. And finally, the insanity angle. Well, none of the characters in this film are insane, but it's clearly a concern. The psychologist and Will discuss his future, and the example of Ted Kaczynski comes up. Incidentally, I think this is where the professor got it. But it's such a strange concept to have that there's one crazy mathematician who started killing people, and he's the first case to bring up. But that's it with Good Will Hunting. I will move to Pi, which was not really part of popular culture at the time, but I think it is now because the director became really, really famous. Many people have seen this in later years. It's about Max Cohen, the mathematician who goes insane, and that's the plot. He tries to find meaning and patterns in numbers, and I imagine that if you do that for decades, it's pretty hard to go insane. Well, pretty easy to go insane, I should say. It's hard to say how the film values mathematics, because what the film depicts as mathematics is so bizarre. It's just numerology. And in this, I think out of all the films, it's the worst offender. The mathematical content really is absurd. For example, Max Cohen's mentor has spent, according to the film, much of his career researching pi. And Cohen wonders why he stopped when he was so close to finding a pattern in that problem. Well, somebody in the internet said that it's not unlike an English professor spending his career studying the word banana. That's a fair point. Mathematical practice also. This is what the guy does. He stares at printouts of random numbers, looking for patterns. And curiously enough, they do discuss this, what he's doing. And the mentor warns him that if he loses scientific rigor, he's no longer doing mathematics, he's doing numerology. But numerology is all there is in the movie. So it is given, the idea is given that it's not a difference in methodology, it's only a difference in rigor. both involve staring at printouts and looking for patterns. Well, the asocial mathematician, this is a hopeless case. Max Cohen, he's a loner and tormented by numbers all his waking hours. And in the end, in the fantasy sequence, he inflicts brain damage on himself, and after that he's able to enjoy life. And he loses his mathematical ability, which, by the way, is portrayed in the film only as being able to do mental arithmetic very quickly, another stereotype which doesn't really correspond to actual mathematicians. Well, insanity angle, this is what the film is about, so not a lot should be further should be said about that, but the lesson of the whole thing is that he finds happiness and escapes from insanity by finding an escape from mathematics. That is the moral of the story. Pretty much the same as Good Will Hunting, I would say. Then, A Beautiful Mind, a huge success, maybe the most popular movie about mathematician ever, or is there even any doubt about that? And it's the story of John Nash, everybody knows that, but the interesting angle is that it's based on Sylvia, is it Nazar or? Nazar, okay. Sylvia Nazar's biography. So we can compare the book and the film. Mathematics clearly is valued because the whole idea again is that there needs to be a very intellectually exceptional character, and Nash fits the bill. As far as mathematical content goes, it focuses on game theory. That's understandable. He won the Nobel for that, and it's easier to explain than his other mathematical work. There's actual mathematical content only in one scene, and now I'm really grateful for Heather showing this scene yesterday. So it's the Nash equilibrium in terms of picking up girls in a bar. So we saw the film yesterday, I don't need to go through that. But the situation is not a Nash equilibrium. When you think about it, it's defined as a situation in which no player can benefit by changing his strategy while the others keep their strategy. Okay, let's take the situation, other guys go for the brunette and Nash goes for the blonde. He changes his strategy, other guys keep their strategy. It's not a Nash equilibrium. So in the scene, in the film, Beautiful Mind, there is exactly one effort to explain the mathematical idea, and it's that, and it's wrong.
But they didn't claim that they were explaining the Nash equilibrium in this scene.
Oh, not in that scene, but I think that's sort of implied, that because after, in the continuing scenes, they talk about Nash equilibrium. Anyway, if that was not even a mathematical idea if they stop it there, so well, mathematical practice, again, he draws formulas on windows, but you do get the idea that mathematics is about ideas and proofs, and not something like mental calculation. But now, this is the interesting question, the social mathematician, because it's a biopic, and we can compare the film with the book that inspired it. The real John Nash did have limited social skills, but according to the book, he was almost the opposite of the character in the movie. In the book, he is competitive, selfish, arrogant, obnoxious, even cruel. For example, he refuses to marry the mother of his first son because she comes from a lower social class. It's also made clear that he was obsessed with winning awards like Fields Medal, which he never did win, and his standing in the mathematical community. Money was also an important factor for him. None of this is in the movie. In the movie, he's this very shy, gentle, unassuming character, very much the stereotype of an absent-minded seeker of mathematical truth. And the negative sides are completely forgotten. For example, an abandoned son is not even included in the movie. So why did they choose to portray Nash in this manner? I think it has to do with insanity. Because insanity will be the key issue in the film. This is a biopic about a mathematician who did go insane. Mental illness is hard to portray in cinema, but there are many ways to do that. And Nash's mental illness has been diagnosed as schizophrenia. It's now known that schizophrenia has a strong genetic foundation, but also that stress in life can cause its outbreak. It's hard to tell in Nash's case because his son suffered from schizophrenia, which does suggest the genetic foundation, but the son was also a frustrated mathematician like his father, so it's hard to draw direct conclusions from that. But in the book, there are many possible factors presented. One of them is his mathematical work, in particular his failures with quantum theory and the Riemann hypothesis. But also mentioned are his homosexual tendencies. In 50s America, it was not easy to be a homosexual. He was arrested, he was dismissed from his job at the Rand Corporation because of homosexual activity. He had his illegitimate child. He didn't win any awards or prestigious academic positions. But none of these factors are mentioned in the movie. In the movie, the only cause identified for schizophrenia is his work in mathematics. And if this is not clear by the end, it's made so in the Nobel-winning speech, which of course doesn't even exist in real life. But he says things like, it is only in the mysterious equations of love that any logic or reason can be found. He never said anything like that. Exactly the opposite. Even in his later years, he has been very, very active in writing about mathematics in very positive light. But the simplistic storyline suggests that mathematics caused his mental illness and human relationships cured it. It's got no basis on reality. It's just based on this old stereotype. And I don't think it's even justified in terms of dramatic consideration. You take a mathematician who suffers from mental illness, he's homosexual, or at least bisexual, and all these private affairs would have made an interesting movie already by that. But again, mathematics is described as something that needs to be escaped in order to find happiness. The final one from films is John Madden's Proof, which was based on David Orburn's play, and when it comes to mathematics, the play and the film are pretty much the same, otherwise not. It's a story of a young woman whose father was a famous mathematician and went insane. The father dies, and a very elegant and important proof is found in his notebooks, and the daughter claims that she was the one who did the proof, and that's the premise of the film. It has a very nice image of mathematics. It's not only something that is done by intelligent people, but they discuss how beautiful and fulfilling mathematics can be. So mathematics is valued highly. The centerpiece of the story is, of course, the proof. We are not told anything about the content of the proof. It's about prime numbers, and that's a good solution. Why put some artificial mathematics when we can leave the mystery? As far as mathematical practice, none of actual practice is shown, but the proof is discussed. Its elegance is discussed, validity, its importance, and it sounds very realistic to me. Well, the asocial aspect, that's overwhelming in the main character. She's very asocial, nervous wreck, emotionally unstable, and she has a sister who's not a mathematician, and she's of course the total opposite. The daughter's love interest, also a mathematician, is portrayed as exceptional because he has interest outside mathematics. He plays in a band, for example, which is totally unforeseen. So, mental illness, that's a key theme. The father has gone insane and the daughter has severe mental problems. So there are three mathematician characters. Two have serious issues with mental health. One who doesn't is an exception in any way. And also there's the other stereotype which I don't discuss in this talk, but this is the main point of the proof, that it plays on the stereotype that all mathematicians are men. And it does that very successfully, I think. Well, that's it for films. Let's move to television. Heather mentioned Big Bang Theory. It's not a film, not a sitcom about mathematicians, but it's about scientists, and I think many points can be applied to mathematicians as well. The humor basically comes from scientists being very stereotypical nerds. And in that sense, the same stereotypes do apply to mathematicians in popular culture often. They're physically weak, they're socially awkward. For example, one man cannot talk to women at all. So that is the extent of the stereotypes. And their non-scientific interests are limited to video games and comic books, very much the definition of geeks. But there's nothing new in that. In the 60s, Jerry Lewis's nutty professor was already this socially awkward geeky scientist. And even before that, there have been characters like that. It's a comedy standard. Most often it's not a mathematician, and I think there's a good reason for that. It's much more fun to have a lab and test tubes and all this around it than just a mathematician's office. So in general, mathematics is not that popular in television comedies. But there are exceptions, mostly Matt Groening series, Simpsons and Futurama. Simpsons does use the usual stereotypes. There's this scientist character which is basically the nutty professor. And all mathematically gifted children are socially inept. But there's also an underlying appreciation for science. Whenever there's an episode about the future, the scientifically acclaimed kids are successful, while Bart and the other goof-offs, they are failures in later life. And in general, it's very pro-science. And now it's quite common to have in television guest actors like Stephen Hawking and all this, but in the time when Simpsons did this was really groundbreaking. But there's also explicit mathematical content. They even corrected one of the errors in Wizard of Oz. Homer finds Henry Kissinger's glasses in a toilet, and he recites Scarecrow's line, and somebody from a booth shouts, "It's a right triangle." I think it's a really good joke, and I think it's a good joke just like that. The two errors, of course, remain, but you don't want to ruin the joke. And there's this episode where Homer goes into this three-dimensional world. There's this, which would be a counterexample to Feynman's last theorem, and P equals NP, all this kind of stuff. How does this come to be? There's a lot of this stuff, and Simonson indeed has written a book about it. Well, this is, if you include mathematicians as writers, you're going to have mathematics in movies and TV shows. And there are a few of those, but none more prominent than Ken Keeler has a PhD in mathematics and writes for Simpsons and Futurama. And in Futurama there's one episode which is quite amazing. It's a farce which is based on a mind-switching machine. So what happens, the minds of all the characters are switched to other bodies, and they find out that the switch cannot be reversed. So there emerges a problem. How can the minds be switched to the original bodies? And what Ken Keeler does, or as in the show to Harlem Globetrotters, he provides a proof that we need only 2 extra people with unchanged minds, and we are guaranteed to be able to restore the original mind-body pairings. And that's actually the proof there. In the internet, this is called the Futurama Theorem. Well, to call it a theorem, that's a bit too much. It's more like a student exercise. But still, it's a mathematical proof, which is constructed for the purpose of an animated TV show, and it's central to the plot. Now, after the solution, one character says, and they say pure math has no real-world application. Well, to us it seems like underlying the obvious, but I think that's a very nice lesson to teach to the audience. So, in a nutshell, I can't stress this enough. To me, this is really remarkable. So, pure math is presented as something useful and cool, and it includes a correct original proof. The characters prove it, and it's central to the plot. Finally, let's move to the numbers. I think it's a rather generic crime drama. There's the exception that one of the characters, Charlie Epps, is a mathematician. And as we saw yesterday, the mathematical connection, sometimes it's really far-fetched, sometimes it's pretty much plausible. And aside from mathematics used to solve crimes, there is mathematical content just for curiosity purposes outside the plot. It clearly holds mathematics in great value, but I think the show goes against all 4 other stereotypes we have studied in this talk. The mathematics is mostly accurate and often quite sophisticated. And a lot of it is actually based on actual crime investing methods. There's a book about this as well by Keith Devlin and Gary Loden, who is the math consultant for numbers. There is this sort of platitude, like everything is numbers, and the mathematical connection becomes rather stretched by the late seasons. That is my general view of it. But overall, I would say it does a remarkable job in presenting mathematics in a crime drama. Also, I like how mathematical practice is presented. The people, they discuss ideas, they do research. It doesn't come out of nowhere. You get the idea that these people are working on mathematics to get these insights. And with a social angle, Charlie Epps is not the stereotypical asocial mathematician. He can be a bit brooding, somewhat disorganized, has a tendency to be obsessive, but in many ways he's a normal human being. And considering that many mathematicians in real life do have qualities like that, I think the character is actually quite realistic. He has a social life, he can communicate with people that aren't mathematicians. The one thing that's not realistic is, of course, that he's a child genius. And Heather mentioned this, all mathematicians need to be geniuses. But then again, when you think about it, in films and TV, you tend to have exceptional characters. So that's somehow an understandable stereotype. And he's not insane, although he does go through a lot of mental strain. Well, as we saw, the mathematical connection becomes pretty loose. For example, the Turing test is not mathematics. So that was just an insight. Well, that wasn't even Charlie's character, but many of the insights are particularly mathematical, especially in the later seasons. So he's just a really smart guy with a lot of knowledge in the end. So the mathematician character is presented as a confident, likable, I would say almost cool in the show. And other groups, like in one episode I watched, the rock climbers were presented as nerdy, so they have sort of turned the tables in that. Okay, for conclusions. We have seen the stereotypes in action, and let's think what's behind them. I think mathematics is highly valued because our society does value mathematics. It's disliked as a school subject, but it's generally accepted that mathematics requires intelligence, it can be valuable. About mathematical content, I have two explanations. First, of course, it's very bad fit with cinema and TV to have actual mathematical content. Still, I think mathematics is, as in my title, the great gibberish. They have expert consultants on these movies and shows, but there's little effort to make viewers appreciate what mathematics is about, as long as it's something that appears difficult. So we don't need to understand it, it's just difficult. Might as well be gibberish. About practice, well, again, there are understandable difficulties. You can't show someone thinking about the theorem for hours and hours on in TV. But I still say it's a poor effort to have the solitary man drawing formulas on windows, which seems to be mathematical practice, even in the best cases. Particularly lacking is the social element. It's not always a solitary figure thinking about the problem. How about the social angle? Well, this is often overdone, but it has some basis on reality. Many mathematicians are introverts, even socially awkward people. But to suggest the kind of social inability that many of the characters have in movies, I think that's almost offensive. But the explanation is probably that many people associate mathematicians with the nerd kids in school. It's a stereotype that's even more common in popular culture than this mathematician stereotype. How about insanity? Well, there are many well-known cases of mental illness, like Nash, Cantor, Gödel, and Kaczynski. And there have been some studies which suggest that there's a connection between the chemistry of highly creative people in the brain and schizophrenia. But the fact is, mental illness is actually very rare among mathematicians. I think the stereotype comes from a very simple connection. If you go through a great deal of mental strain, it causes insanity. And this is what the stereotype what the movies play on. How about the future? Well, it goes without saying that how mathematics is presented in popular culture, it influences our image, the audience's image of mathematics, and vice versa. So in many ways it's true that Hollywood doesn't tell us how to think about mathematics, it just turns on the camera, the stereotypes are already there. But when it comes to mathematicians, most people's opinions will be particularly strongly influenced by popular culture because they don't experience mathematicians anywhere else, real or fictitious. Because for most people the closest thing is a school teacher. And as Heather also said, there are many movies about inspiring math teachers, and then Deliver Lambada, Mean Girls, all these movies, because it seems to be the greatest challenge to be a teacher and to make math interesting. But would you identify your school teacher as a professional mathematician? I don't think you would. So the John Nash of Ron Howard's film may be the closest access to an actual mathematician. These are not just limited to movies or TV shows or books. Journalists like this. For example, when Perelman solved the problem, he was all over the papers because he is such a solitary figure and an exceptional, eccentric character. So what should be done? I think what Simon Singh, for example, is doing is very valuable, to have charismatic people talking about mathematics in an accessible, entertaining way. Of course, if you include mathematicians in the writing process, that's a sure way to get more accurate portrayals as well. But I don't think the future looks that bleak. I was positively surprised when doing research for this talk. If there are characters like Charlie Epps in numbers, it gives a positive reference point of a mathematician to big parts of a generation. There's, for example, the graphic novel Logicomics, which is very nice work. That shows how mathematical ideas or logical ideas can be presented in an entertaining way, but still with accuracy and depth. So, we won't lose the stereotypical nerdy or insane mathematician, but it's a welcome development that there are characters that escape this stereotype. And that there are signs that mathematics doesn't have to be the great gibberish anymore. Mathematical ideas can be presented in an entertaining way and not compromising too much on the accuracy of them. That's it. Thank you.